Okay, welcome to today's tutorial. In the previous video, we looked at the meaning of philosophy and the history of Western European philosophy, and we stopped at the ancient Greek period. In this video, we're going to focus on the medieval period and the modern period of the history of Western European philosophy. So, like I mentioned before, philosophy started when men no longer accepted the methodological religious explanation of the world, right? And in the history of Western European philosophy, there are five periods. We have the ancient Greek period, the medieval period, the modern period, the contemporary period, and the post-contemporary period. In the previous video, we already looked at the ancient Greek period. In this video, we're going to focus on the medieval period and the modern period, right? So, in the medieval period, philosophy was centered on religion. And the two main subjects here, the two main issues here, the two main topics here were the relationship between reason and faith and the proof of the existence of God. These were the two main issues that were discussed in this period. So, for the relationship between faith and reason, it was well explained by Saint Augustine in his book The Confession, where he documented this very powerful phrase, Credo ut intelligam. This simply means I believe so that I may understand. If you read chapter 10 of that book, you will see this phrase, this important phrase, right? So this in this book, The Confession, St. Augustine is trying to explain that understanding comes only through believing God. Your understanding comes only through believing God. Reasons may seek to understand God, but the understanding of God comes only through faith and grace. And this we can only receive through divine illumination. So, what St. Augustine is trying to explain in that part of the book is that the human mind cannot discover truth. The human mind cannot know God except God illuminates the mind. And that is what St. Augustine referred to as divine illumination, right? So that's that for the relationship between faith and reason. Then the next issue that was discussed in this period of philosophy was the issue of God's existence. So St. Aslam was the philosopher who gave the ontological proof of God's existence. This is a very important point. It is very frequent in past questions, right? Who gave the ontological proof of God's existence? It is St. Aslam, right? So the ontological proof is also called a priori proof. Note this, it is also called the a priori proof. And this proof does not depend on evidence. It is not dependent on evidence. So according to the ontological proof of God's existence, it is impossible for God not to exist. So St. Anselm is trying to explain God's existence from the unknown to the known, from the unknown to the known. So this proof, this ontological proof of God's existence is well documented in his book Proslogion, right? Is well documented in his book Proslogion. So St. Anselm in that book explained that the existence of God is in the mind, right? Existence of God is in the mind of men. And that is why unbelievers believe that there is a God. They know that there is a God. So St. Anselm is simply explaining God's existence from the unknown to the known. From the unknown to the known. Then we have Thomas Aquinas, and he was a philosopher that gave the cosmological proof of God's existence. So St. Anselm gave the ontological proof, St. Thomas Aquinas gave the cosmological proof. And this cosmological proof is also called a posteriori proof. Posteriori proof. And this proof depends on evidence. It is dependent on evidence. Ontological proof is independent of evidence. Cosmological proof is dependent on evidence. So St. Thomas Aquinas explained God's existence by the fact that other things exist. So because of the fact that there are other things in the world, you have human beings, you have trees, you have houses, that is a proof that God exists, right? So the cosmological proof is the proof that depends on evidence of the things around you, while the cosmological proof is the proof that does not depend on evidence, right? It explains God's existence from the unknown to the known. So that's that for the medieval period. So next, we're going to look at the modern period. So in the medieval period, philosophy was centered on what? On religion. Very important. Then we have the modern period. So in this period of philosophy, philosophy was centered on reason and science. And under this philosophy, under this period, we have two philosophies. We have rationalism and empiricism. So rationalism is the philosophy which says that knowledge comes only by what? By reason. And we have philosophers that support this. They are called rationalists. So examples of rationalists are René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. You can use the acronym ROSL to remember these philosophers. René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. These are rationalists. They believe in rationalism, that true knowledge comes by reason. So let's look at the philosophies of these men. So René Descartes is a French philosopher and a mathematician. He was the one that wrote the book, The Meditation, where he documented this important phrase, cogito ergo sum. And this simply means, I think, therefore I am. Right? So René Descartes is trying to explain that the art of thinking is what proves a thinker to exist. So without you thinking, you do not exist. So only thinkers exist according to René Descartes, right? So this very important phrase you should know, cogito ergo sum, it was written by René Descartes and it means I think, therefore I am. Then we have Spinoza. Spinoza is a Dutch philosopher from Dutch. His work is entitled Ethics and he demonstrated them in a geometrical manner. Then we have Leibniz, which is the last rationalist we'll be looking at. He's a German philosopher, he's a mathematician, and a logician. He logically brought two principles, right? Principle of contradiction and the principle of sufficient reason. So you can be asked in an exam who brought the principle of contradiction and sufficient reason. It is what? Leibniz. So the principle of contradiction states that contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time. For instance, you cannot say this baby is a girl and this baby is a boy at the same time. These two statements cannot be true, right? That's what Leibniz is trying to explain, that contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time. Then we have the principle of sufficient reason, which states that everything must have a reason or a cause. For example, a child who is very intelligent is intelligent because the child is always reading, right? So that's the principle of sufficient reason. The child is intelligent because the child is always reading, right? So these are the two main principles that were propounded by Leibniz, the principle of contradiction and the principle of sufficient reason. So again, the modern period of philosophy was centered on reason and science, and under that we have two main philosophies. We have rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism is the philosophy which says that knowledge comes by reason, and examples of such philosophers, of rationalist philosophers, are René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. Then we have the other part, which is empiricism, and this is the philosophy that states that true knowledge comes by what? Experience. It comes from observation, from verification, and from laboratory tests, right? So you should know the difference between the two. Rationalism states that true knowledge comes by reason, while empiricism is a philosophy that states that knowledge comes by experience, by observation, by verification, and laboratory tests, right? So These are the empiricists that we have. The three major empiricists that we have: John Locke, Bishop Berkeley, and David Hume. You can use this acronym to remember them: JBD. J for John Locke, B for Bishop Berkeley, and D for David Hume. All of them believe that true knowledge comes by experience, right? Comes by experience, it comes by verification, it comes by laboratory test, it comes by observation, right? So let's look at the philosophies of these philosophers. First, we have John Locke. He was a British philosopher and a political theorist. He was the one that stated that man at birth is a tabula rasa. What this means is that man at birth is a clean slate. It simply means that man at birth knows nothing. So what John Locke is trying to explain here is that man at birth is a clean slate, is a tabula rasa. Man at birth knows nothing. There is nothing in the head of man. But it is through the experience of the world, through the experience of the people around you, through the experience in school, through the experience everywhere. That is what now puts things in your head. That is what now writes some memories in your head, right? So, and this is a very true philosophy, right? Then we have Bishop Berkeley. He is an Anglican bishop. He propounded the theory esse percipi, and this means to exist is to be perceived, right? So what Bishop Berkeley is trying to explain in this philosophy is that whatever cannot be perceived does not exist. So there is this question that is usually asked: how about a mango tree that is in the forest that no one is seeing? Does that mango tree still exist because no one can see it, no one can perceive it? According to Bishop Berkeley, he answered yes, that that mango exists. That mango tree in the forest exists. It exists because God perceives it, right? Bishop Berkeley then further explained that God keeps everything in existence by constantly perceiving them. God keeps everything in existence by constantly what? Perceiving them. So whatever God sees to perceive, that day that thing ceases to exist, according to Bishop Berkeley, right? So the last philosopher that we have here is David Hume, and he was a Scottish philosopher. He stated that our knowledge of the world is based on sense impressions, right? David Hume says that ideas come only from one thing, and that is what? Impression. So our knowledge of the world comes from sense impressions, is based on sense impressions. So you have the knowledge of a good food because you've tasted it. You know what a car is because you've seen it, right? So David Hume is trying to explain that our knowledge comes from our senses. It comes from our eyes, from our ears, from our tongue, from our nose, from our skin, right? We know what a car is because we've seen it with our eyes. We know what food is because we've tasted it with our tongue. We know what bad news is. We know what good news is. We know what uh, the smell or a good smell is through our nose. So David Hume is just trying to explain that knowledge comes from our senses. It comes from our senses, right? So that's that for the uh, empiricist philosophers. So just a quick recap. In the modern history of Western European philosophy, philosophy was centered on reason and science. And under this period, we have two main philosophies. We have rationalism and empiricism. So rationalism is the philosophy which states that knowledge comes by reason, right? And examples of rationalists are René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. So you can use the acronym RSL to remember these philosophers here. René Descartes, S for Spinoza, and L for what? For Leibniz. And we have empiricism, which is the philosophy that states that true knowledge comes by what? Experience. True knowledge comes by experience. And examples of philosophers here, they are John Locke, Bishop Berkeley, and David Hume. We can use the acronym JBD to remember these philosophers. J for John Locke, B for Bishop Berkeley, and D for David Hume. And we looked at their various philosophies and what they contributed to philosophy, right? So with this, we come to the end of today's lesson. In the next video, we're going to continue with the contemporary period of philosophy.